what some of the possibilities might be and dare to dream about what could happen in this city that we all really love. And what we're really talking about here is creative placemaking, which is about community planning and development that is human-centric, that is comprehensive and locally informed. The creative part simply invites artists and arts organizations to join their neighbors in shaping the future of their community. So the notion was first introduced around 2010 and has since been embraced by foundations and consultancies and cities and towns across the country. And for those of you who are not writing a grant on a regular basis and need to insert the words creative placemaking in every single paragraph, Danny Harris, I am just gonna help to clarify it just a little bit more. So creative placemaking projects usually have 4 basic parts. They need to be place-based, that sounds pretty obvious. For instance, a block, a neighborhood, a town, a city, or a region. They need to consider the community conditions for all the people who live in that place and identify some community development change that the group would like to see. For instance, fewer empty storefronts in downtown Los Altos. Involve artists, arts organizations, or arts activities to help to achieve that change that they have identified. And finally, have a way to measure that change that the community is seeking. So this is, again, just the beginning of that kind of process. It is a fundamentally collaborative venture. As I said, engaging the community and stakeholders from the very beginning, and this series of events and conversations is part of that education and consensus building process. What other cities have learned from creative placemaking projects is that by leveraging the power of arts and culture, you can strengthen the community and drive social change. I think we can all agree that the arts are a critical element of the social well-being of the community, and there is a ton of research to back up that assumption. And the leaders of our cities need to consider arts and culture central components in policy and planning discussions. I do believe that's why we're here tonight. It's why I agreed to be a part of this conversation, and I'm hoping that we can help to move that goal in the right direction tonight. So, let's jump right in. Paul, given the little bit that you know in the last half hour, and the fact that you have lived in Los Altos, still live in Los Altos. So why Combinator provides seed funding for startups and seed funding at the earliest stage of a venture funding, and it pays for expenses while you're getting started. If a art plan, public arts project happen to be in your portfolio of funding options, and Los Altos came to you, what kind of project would really blow up your skirt and you'd say, I'm there and I am gonna help you out?
I don't know if that would be really a match for Y Combinator. But
no, I'm well aware. But as a venture capitalist,
right, I can speak to it from a different
angle,
which
portfolio.
is the Generator, which was a space that we started along with that in Reno, kind of aims to achieve some of those same things in terms of, Y Combinator was created to just eliminate those initial obstacles, just to get people started, to get the ball rolling, and out of that. But early on, no one took it seriously. Like they thought it was. The original lawyers actually refused the work to even create it. But out of that, has come all these great companies like Airbnb and Reddit, and we wanted to kind of do this similar thing with art. And so with the Generator, what we did there is just make it so that anyone can come in. You don't have to be anyone special. You can be like, just a homeless dude who's looking for a warm room, right? And then get engaged in hopefully a project or something of their own, or another project. Like mass projects are kind of interesting to me because a lot of them involve like literally hundreds of volunteers, including people who never thought of themselves as artists. And so I think, like, to me, the magic of it is, I'm an engineer, I don't really know anything about art, but the magic of it is that it can act as a kind of magnet that really draws people together in a way that they would not otherwise interact. And I think that automatically enriches a community because you're forming a lot of connections that you wouldn't otherwise have because you're meeting people who are from a different life, right?
So, yeah, Matt, you're going for your, that's where I'm going next. Maybe you could back up a little bit and tell us a little bit more about the generator project, and what your, what your motivation was to get it started and what your goals are and what the status of that is now, and how actually it might inform what could happen in Los Altos as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the generator roots back to this idea that if you can give people a place to create and help them find the resources to create, I think we'll all inherently create. It seems like a simple idea, but for anyone who's worked hard on creative ventures, the act of finding a space where you can paint, where you can lay fiberglass, where you can build 70-foot tall people buildings out of 190,000 pounds of wood, they're not reasonable things to do in most civic settings. And so, Paul's support has been brilliant in allowing us to take and introduce a creative ecosystem to everyone in Reno. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. We have multiple residents who are bound to wheelchairs. We have a large number of seniors. We have kids who are running around on scooters, learning to paint and build with nail guns and hammers, learning to weld with us. The broad majority of the people who work on our projects are not artists. They don't have any technical skills. They're not tradespeople. And they can stand side by side with artists, with accomplished welders, and not just learn how to make art, but learn how to learn how to treat each other better. We've become a safe place for a lot of people who are transitioning from male to female or female to male, or who live in a space that's not defined by gender. We've become a safe space for a wide range of people to know that they can come in and they can forget about what happened in their day-to-day lives and they can just create. And that creativity fosters an enormous community. We have copycat spaces now in Tel Aviv, in France, in Alabama, and there's a number that are coming up. The Tel Aviv space is actually a space that was engaged by the city of Tel Aviv through a number of Burning Man participants from Israel who built a project in 2011 at the generator to directly engage their refugee populace and their immigrant populace together, to work together on projects as opposed to having a very strong kind of animosity towards each other. It's had incredible success. In Los Altos, I think every city, like Los Altos, has buildings that they don't use, maybe old schools, institutional centers that don't have much of a use, that could be very easily repurposed for the creation of art. And you create the funding to ensure that the bathrooms stay clean, there's administrator cares. You track down the passionate people who are already in your community and give them support so they can flourish. Be Guild to Gaudi, be the Medici family to Da Vinci, and that will grow and flourish on its own.
So, Paul, did you go to Reno, or did you go to Reno because Matt was there, or because that was an idea? I mean, you live in Los Altos. If this were an option here, would you get behind something like that?
I mean, there has to be a person who makes it happen. And so how we ended up in Reno is kind of a long story. It sort of started out being involved with Burning Man art project that was in Reno, and seeing, as I said before, kind of like this magnetic effect of it really bringing together people who wouldn't otherwise be interacting. And so we thought that was a really an interesting and impressive dynamic, and wanted to figure out a way to create that on a more permanent basis versus just kind of a few months in the summer or whatever. And then coincidentally ended up basically meeting Matt, who had built a really cool project, like a giant crashed ship at Burning Man. And it has that same quality where And I think this is kind of the thing that I see as what makes public art really good, is if it is this thing that just draws people in. Like, you see it from across down the street or wherever it is, and you look at it, you're like, wow, what is that? I want to go see, right? And that doesn't work if it's just bland and boring. If you see something that's like, oh, it's thinking, or like, what is that thing? It automatically brings people in, and they're all kind of looking at it together, probably taking pictures, probably taking selfies, maybe they're climbing on it, whatever it is, and then they start interacting with each other. So it creates a lot of serendipity.
Well, again, to my point of how do we solve some of the empty storefronts in Los Altos? It means getting more people to think that Los Altos is a good destination to come into downtown in particular. And often a monumental public art piece, like the Bean in Chicago, a super obvious one, would be that kind of attraction. And again, Matt, what inspired me about some of the conversation that we had before we got started here is your idea that, go bold, go big, think big, dare to dream, rather than some of these sort of distinct smaller pieces, like creating something big. Easier said than done. Big is bold and exciting and ultimately great, but there are a lot of obstacles along the way. So maybe you can speak briefly about that, because then I'll move on to some of our other panelists.
Big requires a reason. Within your community, there are probably thousands of people of all walks of life who have dreamt of doing something audacious. You create the space, you give them a path to the resources, all of you, support them, and they'll do it. And that's it. It's a bigger question, it's a bigger punishment. They have to be a little mad, they have to be a little insane, but we are human beings. We built the pyramids, we built the Eiffel Tower, we built La Sagrada Familia. Let's just step up.
We're still working on that.
Yeah, 110 years, whatever it is now. We provide the space, we provide an encouraging ecosystem, and we bring in mentors. Paul's been a brilliant mentor. I've kind of collected this series of mentors that have filled in the blanks in my knowledge, share skills, let people be who they are, and they'll make amazing works. You take one of those storefronts and give them to a collective of artists who may be a mix of kids and adults, who may be professional, not professional, and you'll see it slowly grow. This thing will shift. You have to be a little bit ready for the weirdos to come, but it's your ability, you can curate that and let it move, and it grows, and it does what London and Paris and Barcelona have done.
So, Danny, I've heard you speak many times, and you have always presented some really, not just inspiring, but super fun, really creative, innovative projects that have happened in cities around the country. And you've been in San Jose now for about 3 years, and I think some big things have happened in that time, but obviously we've got some of our own hurdles and issues there. But I'm wondering, again, rather than getting into what the problems might be, let's stay on the Dare to Dream track here, and if you could talk a bit about some of those projects that have really created change in those cities, basically due to the creation of those projects.
Sure, thank you. So I want to stay positive, but I want to start with, I guess, a reality and provocation. The first one is that to arrive in Silicon Valley is to be disappointed. So if you are from the outside and you imagine the Jetsons or sort of colorful Google, everything, the reality is that we're suburban and strip malls, and we are sort of highways as far as the eye can see, because we never really built a place for people, we built it for cars. So I want to use that as a starting point. Which then leads to the provocation, which is, we work in Akron and Detroit, and I can tell you with a significant amount of certainty that there were a group of people like us who were sitting in Detroit 50-something years ago, believing that the wealth and the innovation in the talent would never end. Never ended. And that was happening in Pittsburgh and Akron and Gary. And so when I look around here and I see this incredible wealth and opportunity and innovation, which is here, maybe it's fleeting, maybe it's not, depending on what tea leaves you read, my main question is, what will all of this leave behind? You go to Pittsburgh and see what they left behind. You go to Detroit, you see Belle Island. You can go to each place that was sort of locked in peak wealth, and they actually built things that lasted beyond them. Today, Silicon Valley has built almost none of that. You can look at where our wealth is going, and it's not going into these areas. So again, that's sort of, I'm a product of a Jewish and Italian mother, so I have anxiety on both sides. So deep existential questions, but I'll sort of move away from that and sort of talk about the big opportunities. For me, where I think, and I think Matt is right, what is our vision? Who do we want to be when we grow up? Because we have all of these incredible things, and I can sort of talk to you about different opportunities in each city, but the reality is that, one, there's the vision, but two, there are the people who believe and are willing to run their head against the wall for 10 or 20 or 30 years, the founders of the High Line. Any of you have been to LA now and see this incredible progress that they made with the LA River. 51 miles of the LA River will become transformed over maybe the next 50 years with Frank Gehry and $1 billion from the federal government. When we look at these projects, and you can take Atlanta and the Beltline and the Green Line, there are these really significant big projects that were led by community leaders who were just maybe a group of friends sitting together having a beer and dreaming big. And so why is it that here we can believe that death is negotiable, says Peter Thiel, or that we can land on and colonize Mars, but the best we can do with creative placemaking, with all due respect to some of the projects here, is sort of the intersection of what would look like a one-night stand between a duty-free shop in Europe, and that becomes the new urbanism that we're building and putting in place. So I believe that there's opportunity for bigger, and I believe that it starts with sort of individuals who push and provoke their leaders to want bigger and better things. And so yes, I can talk about a whole series of ideas from rapid prototyping to big projects like the Guadalupe River in San Jose should be our, not just the LA River, but let's just think one step further. So right now we're building parks for current usage. And right now our kids are using parks with augmented reality, right? So they're going to explore via Pokemon Go. So a big project we're doing at night is the intersection between public spaces and augmented reality. How do we get people out and engage with what's around them, recognizing that that's a future trend? So let's take it one step further, that big idea. Why don't we take the Guadalupe River in San Jose, which is 27 miles, and build out what the future of a park or public space would look like? Why aren't we taking the best of landscape architects with the best of technologists and putting them in a room and seeing the amazing things that could come from it? And so that's just one small idea, but with everything we're doing about art and placemaking and creativity, we are the place that has an incredible opportunity to think in an interdisciplinary fashion. So the people who are working on art should be sitting with the public health folks and should be sitting with the seniors. Because right now the biggest issue that we're facing with seniors is about isolation and depression and loneliness. So why is it that all of these things we're not thinking in ways that bring in communities to come together and think about and solve problems? So for me, I can talk about ideas, but I think the process and that thinking is critically important, and I think we have it, I'm sure many of you do, but it's really something that we lack given our resources and opportunities here in the region.
Thank you, and I couldn't agree with you more. I will say that I would encourage you to invite Danny back so that he could do a slideshow and inspire maybe some thoughts on what could be possible, the kind of legacy that we could leave behind in this valley. I think that those visuals really do bring to life exactly the kinds of things that you're talking about. They don't address some of those issues, but I think that it does start with somebody saying, damn it, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it here. So Chris, you might want to, at this point, start with some ideas from IDEO, or I did want you to talk about, even though you run a bricks and mortar science center where people come in and you have exhibitions there, but you also do a number of very robust programs that go way outside of the museum. The one that really caught my attention was the studio for public spaces, and I wondered, you could go in any direction you would like, my friend, but that was one that I thought might be of interest, particularly to this conversation.
All right, thanks, Cathy. And hello, Los Altos. I think this is really cool that you're gathering and talking about this, and that you're engaging deeply in a process to do something well. Right? This is the heart, and you can tell it's already. With the examples, there's tribulations and challenges to doing anything audacious or bold in the way some of my friends up here have been talking about. But I think there's so much potential if you can engage in a process that does that well. Just what you're doing today, which I would characterize as gathering inspiration, is extremely important. I think ultimately your community is going to have to decide to do something and do it in a way that suits this community. But gathering inspiration from others is a really great place to start. And I think, I think inspiration for me is a really important thing. One of the reasons I'm at the Exploratorium is I find it to be one of the most inspirational places on earth. But inspiration isn't about the things, and just, one of the things that resonated with me when I first came to the Bay Area from New York, and experience places like the Exploratorium, which to me really embody authentically the sort of spirit of the San Francisco Bay Area, and that kind of creative energy that has been so much part of it in last half century in particular, is that things like art and science don't have to be distinct poles on some spectrum, but and they don't even have to be nouns, right? There's a tendency to think of art as a noun. It's a thing on behind the velvet rope, we were talking earlier, or on the wall. But same with science. I think art and science can be viewed much more, and I like to do them more as more about the journey than the destination, more verb than noun. Right? And I'd encourage you also to think that way. Right? A lot of what Matt's describing, Paul's describing with the generator, is people participating in these things. And I think the creative process and that journey, that art making, that art as a way of seeing and knowing and exploring the world around you is really, really interesting. And is what I would draw from the Exploratorium in this conversation. Is that art doesn't have to be this thing that, this thing you experience as something someone else created and impresses you. I think really the powerful thing is how it makes you feel, right? You should focus less on what you want to place around your beautiful community in the sunshine, and perhaps more about the kind of experiences you want to create for your community, and the way you want those people to feel. Right? There's that great Maya Angelou quote, I'm going to go wrong, but something like, they'll forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made me feel. How do you want Los Altos to make visitors and citizens feel? Right? If you can come to some kind of point of view, and I think that's also the real hard thing too. I think giant figures greater than larger than the Statue of Liberty. How many people there were?
190.
Yeah, for example, that's one way to go. But I would also argue that you can get a lot of signal with many smaller things if you can orchestrate with some kind of clear point of view, some kind of clear perspective, which is hard to do as a group, certainly as a community. But the whole becomes greater than the sum of parts. And that is really when it's something magical too, where you say something about this place, right? Not just, anyway, I think that there's, my favorite examples are where things come to life because you discern a signal. And it causes people to think and reflect and have insights maybe even about themselves as much as about the community. And so, I don't know, I'm kind of meandering because the question is super open-ended. But my journey is aerobics here? Is that what you said?
Jazzercise.
Jazzercise. This jazzercise room includes a very strong belief in the educational sphere that everybody is great. I think there are others here that too are basing their careers on enabling of others. And I wouldn't say the creative space is for creative people. I think it's for everybody. And I think to the extent you leave people feeling or seeing some more creativity in themselves, you've done your community well.
So can you talk a little bit about the Studio for Public Spaces?
Oh, sure, I forgot about that. So the Exploratorium.
It is all that.
So to back up, the Exploratorium is indeed a museum-like entity. We probably actually think of it more as a public learning laboratory, right? And on Pier 15 in San Francisco, and we have about 850,000 people come through the doors there every year, engaging with a whole range of kind of exhibits that we've mostly created there. About 95% of them were created there over the years. That various phenomena at the center. We work with artists in residence, all sorts of scientists, and it's just kind of really cool to me. Creative environment that was interdisciplinary before interdisciplinary innovation was like, I don't know. We also do important teacher professional development, so we're doing a lot of stuff, that's outside the school system, complementary to it, doing a lot of things that help teachers build their craft, particularly math, science. My sister actually is a high school biology and chemistry teacher in Massachusetts and came out with a teacher institute and was probably the main person who told me that I couldn't take the job. So keep me out of family. And we also do stuff out in the world. It's not in the museum nor enacted through sort of formal school systems and such. And Studio for Public Spaces is one of those. We also have a large group called Global Studios that works with other like-minded entities to bring our inquiry-based pedagogy and our kind of hands-on learning experiences to far-flung places on the globe, as well as to other parts of the community, whether it's on mission students or different parts of San Francisco. We have a mobile unit that the Studio for Public Spaces designed that's going around public libraries. Took my daughter to co-op and but these are again similar to the experiences you find in the museum itself that are really exposing people to phenomenon and again we call it inquiry based, which is there's less of a providing an answer and more about creating an experience that invites the question and gets people connecting the dots themselves. Really, hopefully, if we're successful, it sparks curiosity and takes people on a little bit of a journey that allows them to discover on their own and make sense of things. And I think, again, to my earlier point, when successful, the transformative learning experience isn't transformative because they just learned something about the world around them, but it's transformative because they've learned something new about themselves. And they're a little more confident that they can indeed make sense of things and more likely to engage with topics related to that science.
So as part of the museum art world, I see museums engaging in these kinds of activities a lot. I mean, it seems to be like a new way, but I think that unless you are directly experiencing them, or if you're in the art world, it might be a little surprising to realize the kinds of activities that museums and arts institutions and artists and other arts organizations are actually bringing out into the community that aren't just the normal come in and we'll tell you, we know and you don't, and we'll tell it to you. That is all really changing, and while it applies to the museum world, I think that way of thinking can also apply to this whole process as you move forward in terms of the plan.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah, please.
So I think just another important thing to note around this is that right now, 60% of millennials are choosing a job, or choosing a city before a job. So if you actually think about that, the competitive marketplace for place is going to just be incredibly more cutthroat over time. So right now, you're not choosing between, you're choosing between Oakland and Brooklyn, and these are how decisions are being made. So when you start to see that that's also driving choice in the way that, in some cases, developers, in some cases, cities, in some cases, the combination between the two, the other interesting sort of caveat to those examples are where you have either developer or company, sort of a reimagining of the developer or the company. So on the one hand, if anybody's been to Miami and seen the Wynwood Walls, which was created by Goldman Properties, which was really on the front line of developing a lot of neighborhoods, they led with art. It was always driving revenue and opportunity for them. And then the other three interesting examples are across Las Vegas, Baltimore, and Detroit, where now you have basically companies or individuals that are successfully or not basically taking on the responsibility of redeveloping the downtown. So Under Armour is doing it in Baltimore. Dan Gilbert from the Quicken Loans Companies and Rock Ventures is doing it in Detroit, and Tony Hsieh did it to mixed results in downtown Vegas. So a lot of it is just being driven by the fact that employees are there and they're trying to figure out how to keep them there. So recognizing that there's a difference here in Los Altos about the live-work balance, that's also an incredibly interesting model to look at about people who see the value in this and recognize that it's directly tied to talent attraction, retention, and driving revenue from development.
Can I expand really?
Yeah, sure, yeah. Kelly, guess what?
All these institutions, all these institutions were started by effectively one or two people. The California Academy of Sciences was started in a man's house. These things that we do, these things that everyone does, these are a starter and a follower. These ideas seem so huge, but the Eiffel Tower was built by Joseph Eiffel to show off his steel. The man who built the Brooklyn Bridge died of the bends before they knew what the bends was. The Statue of Liberty was the first crowd-funded project that has a famous letter from a small little girl who donated $1 that said she saved up that $1 for a year because she loved it so much. Whether or not your institutions, that your state, your city, your county engage in these things, each one of you has a valuable idea that you can engage in. And if you follow that passion, if you drive it forward, someone else is going to love it. Art's a love affair. So engage in it. Be ready for it. Chase it down like you chase down every other thing that you've loved in your life, and it will happen. And this city will grow and become amazing for it.
Okay, we're done. You should have saved that. But you're absolutely right. I'm going to bring it down just a couple of notches there.
Are you talking about budget?
Well, we're going to talk about what a real estate developer is, what their stake in all of this is. And, I know that it is about the long-term sustainable growth of the city. And Kelly, I am wondering how you see public art and or place-making projects playing a part in the long-term sustainable growth of Los Altos.
Okay, I had to think about that after that lofty speech came out there. A little preamble before I start to answer your question directly, Cathy, which is the thing that I haven't heard anybody talk about a lot since you mentioned it in your introduction is the ability for art to drive social change. I grew up in a weird Victorian arts community in Western New York called the Chautauqua Institute, which is a perfect example of architecture as art, right? I work in a world of the built environment and architecture. And so the Chautauqua Institute in Chautauqua, New York, there's other transient ones around the country historically, it is full of adorably, historically preserved Victorian homes, all built between 1880 and 1905 or something like that. And it's highly protected. And in Los Altos, as a relevant example that many of you Los Altans may know, right? There's a proposal right now to create an overlay district for Eichler homes and single-story homes. There are Eichler preserved historic neighborhoods in Mountain View and Palo Alto and other neighboring communities because the people who live in those communities, Los Altos or Palo Alto or Davis or Chautauqua, they care about that, and architecture is a form of art, and it's one that we manifest on a daily basis. You may not get to the Metropolitan Museum or the Guggenheim every day, but if you're lucky, and most of us are, we do go home every night, and so you can live in something that brings you peace. And so, in order to get to Cathy's point then, I think, in order for us to think about what role art could play in a town like Los Altos, where I'm working now, after a 20-year career of working in Sunnyvale and San Jose and Walnut Creek and Fremont, so I have enough experience with other similarly sized, sort of mid-sized Silicon Valley boring jurisdictions, Danny, to say that the thing that this community needs to grapple with isn't should it be modern or should it be classical? Should it be a fine art or should it be performing arts? Should it be enclosed or should it be outdoors? Those decisions all come easy once you decide communally what is the social change that you want? Where do you want to be? And that we have heard from all the panelists up until now, which is how to evoke and incentivize and breed the desire for a better and more just world, hopefully. If I guess you could want it to be less just, and which brings, well, we won't go there. But so
Another panel, another day.
yeah, exactly.
That I'm not moderating.
Yeah, so I think that, for all of the challenges that a relatively historic community in Silicon Valley, Los Altos is pretty old, right? Compared to San Ramon, which, there wasn't, who knows when the first person lived in San Ramon, Los Altos has been here for a while in a, second half of the 20th century, community, sort of post-World War II area. And so the challenge is, how quickly does change come? And what is the yield of that change, right? To use a real estate and an industrial term, what are we hoping to cash in on? Is it technical innovation? Because we've got tons of great technology that you can isolate yourself with headphones and VR and sit by yourself in a dark room. Is it hyper efficiency? Maybe. Hyper-efficiency sounds great until you realize that the money crunchers, that means value engineering and budget reduction, and what you end up is boring, predictable, and cheap, right? Which isn't exactly inspiring. Or is what we want to catalyze and evoke, equality and justness and the ability to be creative and to live your truth if you're non-binary or, gender fluid or, super into tattoos or orthodox religious. Find the speed with which the community wants to change and what they want that ultimate vision to be. And so, when I talk to people in Los Altos, I don't say, oh, what do you think about, the color green or, how do you like this art versus that art? That's not important. My questions are always, what do you care about? What do you care about for your kids? How do you commute every day? How much time do you spend alone and how much time do you spend with other people? And so the ability to come together into a place and share a vision and share a goal, I think is the necessary underlayment, the necessary structural foundation in order to get the creativity and the lofty, the lofty results of that input.
So my answer to that for Los Altos would be dogs, having just been to the pep parade on Saturday. Everybody comes to the pep parade, everybody, and they all get behind it. Can we just talk a little bit, because then we'll open it up to questions in about 10 minutes, but Kelly, I am assuming that you were working with Los Altos during the SF MoMA project, or could at least speak to it a little bit. Because that, as many of you probably know, SF MoMA closed for 3 years to do their big renovation. And they took a lot of projects on the road. And one, I was just so excited to realize that one of them, sort of multi-venue, was going to be in my very own town of Los Altos. And came down here one Friday night when the place was just absolutely hopping. There was some really great art, some really good projects, and that was one night, and it was a specific night with some events along with it. I'm just wondering, of course that packed up and went away. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the impact of that project.
Sure. For the record, I was not officially working in Los Altos, but I was aware of it and happy to speak to it. And perhaps more importantly, and to Danny's point, we can design places or experiences or art for today, for us to enjoy, or we can think about what the impact is. And so maybe it's better that I wasn't directly involved then, because I now live the impact of what SF MoMA was when it was downtown for 8 or 10 months, something like that. And I can tell you that it absolutely spoke to your goal, Cathy, of sort of speaking to economic revitalization and the empty storefronts and the, energizing, what the changing economy and the changing preferences of the downtown population, whether they live here or shop here, they're not doing the same things downtown that they did in 1964. It's simply true that you don't do the same things. You don't buy your bread and milk every day downtown the way you did. And so when the principal for Lacey was able to, and her family foundation were able to provide financial support in order to have SF MoMA come down and provide the real estate literally for it, the 2,000 square feet at State Street. What it did was it gave people a reason to come here. So instead of just coming for your kid's orthodontics lesson or dentist appointment, no offense, Maddie, but we all need our dentists. There would be a reason to attract people from maybe a little further away, or a reason to come downtown and stay for reasons other than just picking up your eyeglasses at the glass shop. And that was the transformative, to me, the things that I've heard, again, on the real estate side, that's the transformative effect of that, is it created a singular shared reason to be in a place with other people, to share an experience, whether it was for 10 minutes or 110 minutes. Sometimes that's a short-term reason, like Pokemon Go in a park, you're with other people for 5 or 10 minutes at a time and it's serendipitous and you didn't expect it. Or sometimes it's a world-renowned art gallery or museum where you plan the trip 2 weeks ahead of time when your mom flies in and you all come down. But art can create the incentive to have a shared experience and to experience it with other people in a place together. So that's what I hear. People are like, oh, that was so great. No one ever says, because of that one installation on the south wall. I haven't heard that in 3 years of working here. What I've heard is, oh, it was so cool to come downtown, and the way we were, and then we all got the chocolate at the chocolate shop afterwards, and how can we get more cool stuff like that to come and see? I haven't heard a word about a particular thing. It's always about the experience of coming here and being with people.
And that connectivity, which is really, I think, the big kind of incentive for people to come. I mean, it's so ironic that we're all connected globally and yet so isolated through that very act of connectivity that we really aren't that we really aren't actually having human contact with each other, even though we might be speaking to hundreds of people every night through our devices. So my gallery, the Institute of Contemporary Art in San Jose, grapples with this same issue of how do we, without turning into a YMCA, because that's not really what I want to do. I mean, it is about the art and it is about the accessibility of the art, but how do we make that art organization, that place, a destination and a forum for connecting people and ideas and conversation and dialogue. Our little neighborhood is transforming. It used to be really auto dealerships and mostly auto dealerships and some creative design firms, but no real retail space that was activated. And now they're building 3 residential projects, one that just got finished, about 250 units, one that's about to break ground, and another next year that's going to break ground. And now all of a sudden the ICA has gone from needing this big megaphone to get to people in Los Altos and Palo Alto who would rather, quite honestly, turn their cars to the north, to being trying to figure out how to be a neighborhood resource. And how we get the people from right across the street to come in and engage with the art and think of us as a resource. And I look to how, what some of the projects could be in Los Altos that would do the same thing. Palo Alto has Pace Gallery now. Why couldn't Los Altos have a like gallery, and from that springs others. I remember when I first came to the ICA, Jack Fisher, God rest his soul, who was the art critic at the Mercury News, said, well, would you be upset if another gallery moved in down the street? Are you kidding me? Like, bring it on. Let's have 10, 20. It's the only way. It's, really, I had 1,000 square feet of gallery space. Like, it's not going to take them long. They're not going to just come for the ICA. So yes, let's have a lot of it. And I just wonder, with the proliferation of online shopping and your ability to get your linens and your eyeglasses and almost anything you want online, that maybe that retail model is changing a bit to something where if you're offering something truly unique, one of a kind, perhaps even made by somebody here that you could meet and talk to about it, that that might be something that would be a good idea to be thinking about in terms of Los Altos. So, any other comments there?
Those hurdles seem, initially when you think about creating a small gallery in Los Altos, think about it less as a gallery and more of a creative space where there's art. And there are buildings that are here that the city has possession of that could be used for an entrepreneur, someone with an interesting idea that builds equity in their model that allows this small first stage of art to grow out of it. I don't know how many of you know that there's actually a really cool little water tower behind here with little peach baskets and kind of the evidence of the city. If you take those things, those little spaces that are historical, and then you bring in some new ideas, some new art, some new people, and give them a chance to succeed. Mainly be for 6 months, a tech space for an art-related institute. And you reduce those barriers to entry. Primarily for artists, the biggest barrier to entry is going to be cost. We spend $300 on an oil painting that we sell for $100. Artists aren't business people. We're just inherently not. But if you guys can bring to the table business people, marketing people, the people who understand how to get and secure property, how to build art institutions into development projects, you'll start to see that art flourish. And you'll start to see the people who are here, who are growing up in this community, the people who are here who have been in this community and wondered if they could ever show their art in public, they'll start doing it. And they'll build slowly. And it's just one idea. It's what we've been doing in Reno for 4 years now, and we're about to get 4.5 acres from the city of dead property on the river to turn into an art park and a beautiful waterfront, raised bed gardens that brings the community together to do something really interesting.
So I think, going back to my original comments about, needs to be place-based, needs to consider the community and what change the community really wants, that it does involve artists and creative thinkers and arts organizations, and that there's a way to measure that change, sort of to Kelly's point, to our final kind of comments here. What is it? How can we measure that change? And so I think we've kind of got that conversation going. I really would implore you to be sure that the powers that be who are going to be ultimately voting on what happens here and how money is spent in this town really are convinced that you guys consider arts and culture a central component to the policy and planning discussions moving forward. And so with that, I think we can open it up to questions from the audience.
I'll throw the microphone so we can
Hi, my name is Pat Marion. Matt, I want to thank you for using the word audacious, because that is a word that is not much heard in city government or any government. And I remember it, I don't know if you guys ever heard of Guy Kawasaki. He was an early Apple evangelist, and one of his books, he talked about mission statements, which at one time everybody had a mission statement. And he said it should be really audacious. Nobody has audacious mission statements anymore. I was really lucky to work for Steve Jobs and John Warnock, and they are both scientists and artists in wonderful combination. And there are very few of those people, even in our industry. What's really hard for me, and I'm told this over and over again, is that my expectations are too high for government. That the kind of people and the speed at which things should happen and the decision-making process, that's not how we do things in government, and I should lower my expectations, and I don't want to do that. But right now, we have this group that's talking about a public art plan. We just have some really ugly placemaking signs that are going up in the city that look like they should be for the Safeway. And we have a visioning process totally separate from this art planning process. And I don't think anybody in the city really has a vision. I think there are so many groups that are just going head to head. There are the people who don't want anything to change. There are the people who want growth, but nobody knows how much growth is good growth. We need an audacious vision for this town, and I don't know that there's anybody in this town who's going to give it to us. And as far as lobbying the city council and anybody else, lots of luck with that, because they listen to us, and we're at each other's throats, and we can't compromise, and we can't get anything done. Just getting the signs done, these hideous things, has taken 4 years. They were approved in 2013, 4 years ago. And now we've got, we can't decide on a community center. Everything just sort of falls apart. So I don't know how we can be audacious when we're dealing with government.
Can I just chime in on that? Because
Please.
we do a lot of work with government, and I think that when I first started, my thought was that our biggest challenge of working with city government was the fear of failure. Because if you look at it, especially in San Jose City Hall, everybody gets one floor but the attorneys who get two. So it sort of talks a lot about how things work, and especially here we like to sue each other. What I realized over time was that, one, you actually have a lot of great people who go into the city with the right set of intentions, and there's sort of structures in place that challenge creativity in different areas. But then what I started to realize is that part of the fear that we actually started to see was the fear of success. So we started prototyping and working on a number of models, and then when they landed, there was this kind of oh shit moment in the city, which is, now this works, now people are going to start to expect it happening, and it's not always a set of resources, but it's a question of restructuring. So one of the ways that we started looking at that is that, I love Detroit. If anybody been there, there's sort of this wonderful richness to it, and especially now. But they brought in a new planning director, a guy named Maurice Cox. The first person he hired on his team, this is the person's title, is they're the director of yes, exclamation point. Just imagine what it looks like for a city when they realize that whatever the change might look like, but they're going to publicly face an employee whose focus is director of yes. And what that changes in terms of the mindset of the community, or the notion of what innovation looks like. So those were kind of two big takeaways that I saw, and yes, you know, the best and brightest may go to the White House sometimes. They may go work in and around our mayors sometimes. But the reality is they're not always at the City Hall, and we have to figure out, one, how we strengthen those networks, two, how we empower the individuals within, and also how we don't view them as the enemy. I think too often we view it as us versus them. And I think, as you said, there's obviously a lot of infighting here. We need to find more creative ways of having them be on our side and finding those champions, especially when we have strong mayors who do have visions or have the possibility to step into it. Sorry.
That's great. You hit the nail on the head. And you also go into, it takes time to change culture. It takes time to change culture in cities. Trying to get this microorganism that is Los Altos to move in the same direction is going to be very hard. What I would implore you to do is figure out how to encourage people around you of like-minded intentions to start these institutions from the ground up and start to work to show the city, to show the elected officials that they work and they're bringing attention to the city. That's what we've worked very hard to do in Reno, and it's taken us a very long time. And it took Burning Man nearly 20 years to get the county to understand that they were a good influence. It's taken us 4 years to get to the point to where we orchestrated this property donation of a dead piece of property that's next to the waste dump at the end of the day. Engage those people who are passionate and find a way to find a compromise to support them, whether it's in your backyard, whether it's in a business you might own. And there's lots of little simple ways to start moving. If we're all ants with a little grain of sand, pick where you're going to put that, and together you'll build a new city.
Awesome setup and question. One thing I'd add to what's already been said is, well, I think you should aspire to the audacious. I would recommend prototyping your way forward. Try and lower the anxiety bar a little bit by trying things, agreeing together to do something on a temporary basis or in a smaller area, and try and create authentic enthusiasm once that's experienced. Planning is really difficult and can be seemingly never-ending, and the description of the signs that have taken me several years leads me to believe. Can you just get to a place where you agree to just do something and then undo it if need be, right? I think somehow getting past the high stakes feel of all these things is a really smart place to go. And so spend more time talking about process and potential roadmaps and don't try and jump all the way to audacious in a single bound.
Audacious hurts.
I'll pile on this scrum. This seems like a good one. As a real estate developer for 20 plus years now, I've been the butt of a lot of criticism for being just mildly audacious, you know. I've got a back like a duck and the water just rolls off. But I have worked on the other side of the table. I've worked in the public sector and I've represented cities and represented public agencies. And given the political environment where we are in this country, in this world, you know, where 14-year-old girls are bombed to death at a cultural event, at an arts event, I have to re-up my defense of government and government process and systems, because it's slow and it's bureaucratic, because it's intended to protect us. It's not supposed to change on a whim, and it's not supposed to take over 5 acres of property and say, from now on, 30 days notice, it's going to be this instead. It's okay to have government systems and long-winded elected officials and processes of planning, because the risk and the reward for modifying them too much is too great. We shouldn't be risking that. We need our systems in place to protect us against, demagogues and bad people who ascend to power. But on the flip side of that, given if you give that, if you give that as a premise, then where do we have the opportunity? And it's in smaller prototyping projects, or in the built environment, what we would call, public-private partnerships, for instance, right? How do you take the vision that a community might have, a community of people, not an elected official or a government bureaucrat, but actual people who live in a town or who work in an apartment building or whatever that is. How do you take that vision and implement it without 5 years of process? And that's by finding a sponsor, finding your Medici, finding your muse, and somebody with the resources, whether the resource is an empty storefront or an accessory dwelling unit where they can house an artist for free, or for $250 a month in rent if they can't afford it, or if it's sponsoring an artwork or paying for materials. Figure out where those resources are, and then just use the laws and the structures of governance to figure out a way to make the cat's cradle, to connect the dots to get there, right? Don't call them loopholes, call them opportunities. If there's a way that you can fund money or fund open space or fund, a program, an arts dancing recital, and you can put it under the guise of economic development, go for it, whatever it takes. Just make the art happen. So that's also artist housing.
All right, well, I think audacious is a very powerful word, and in our business, it really is fundamental. Like, we're interested in funding audacious studies. We've funded, we have a company working on nuclear fusion, we have a company working on supersonic jets, we have people trying to cure cancer, and these are all like really big goals, but at the same time, what we do with these founders, which are, it's usually 1 or 2 people, maybe 3 people, trying to achieve this thing that everyone thinks is impossible, like a commercially viable supersonic transport. The thing we always push for is just like, what are you going to do today? What can you deliver today? What can you deliver in a week? Like, break it down. I think sometimes people, the big idea seems too difficult, and so they sort of scale back their ambitions. But I think you want to keep the ambition, or if anything, like, increase the ambition, but then figure out what you can deliver right now. Like bring it down to something really simple. And there's always like a worse version of whatever you want to do. I like to sometimes tell the story that the Gmail, the very first version was, I wrote in like 1 day. It sounds impossible, except it was really bad. But I, released it out to everyone and kind of iterated from there.
Yes, go ahead.
I almost feel like I should say, hi, I'm Mary Lynn, and I'm a politician. I'm the vice mayor of the city of Saratoga, a city not too different from the city of Los Altos. And I have a vision. I have a vision. Last year, fortunately, with the vice mayor of the city of Saratoga, we asked the city council, the other remaining 3, to let us form an ad hoc task force to look into forming public art and do that discussion. Thank you for bringing the idea of toning it down a little bit, because we did have to start early, and this will be getting to a question I will be asking going forward, and it has to do with prototyping, which you both have brought up. This year we succeeded in making it into a committee, so we're solid, and as long as we can keep the recession at bay, folks, which is huge and an important factor in any city government, we will go forward. It may be a few more years before I can actually see that we will become a commission, but that's my plan. You have talked big ideas. You've talked Burning Man. The best that Saratoga has right now, and I'm going to promote it, is wine tasting from any day, any time. It's really great.
Nothing wrong with it.
Nothing wrong at all, and we have pet parades some years too. But what I'm getting to is we have Montalvo, which is a tremendous art center, which has its own authenticity, its own reputation. Last year we partnered with them, which is another opportunity too, to bring a piece of art into our community to say, hey, this is what we are going to be about. My question goes to, when you are a small town and you do have small spaces and you do not have large buildings, I'm going to back up a little bit. One of the things that I campaigned on, thank you for mentioning the Highland, yes, thank you, was to try and marry our beautiful natural aspects with our economic and our art. And I think that's essential and something to keep in mind too. Anytime you can do that so that you know you are supporting your economic base. But given the fact that we do have a small area and art is subjective, and you want support from your voters, which flips the other thing on the other side, because you have to have support from your voters if you're going to get funding. How do you promote or launch projects? Do you do it with the idea that they will be temporary and see how they are felt? Or do you have any other ideas on that specifically?
I grew up on the North Shore of Tahoe. One of the things that I always wished I had permission to do, which I didn't realize I needed permission to do it, was to go out in the woods and make art. So there's a lot of places where it's just someone waiting for permission. We are in a society of rules, and a lot of us, even the rebels, have a hard time knowing what rules we can break and what risks we can take. So set up small places, little spaces where people can come and make art and grow from there. Temporary is beautiful. The space that we built will be installed in Reno at the beginning of July, as long as this delay that's being really annoying doesn't get us. And the city will end up spending about $70,000 for it. We're looking at selling it for $33 million. There's a big difference between those two numbers. And one of those numbers is just the cost of installation, because it's temporary. There's a city engaged, it's a community we love, and that brings those numbers down for our audacious works. If you empower people, give them permission to make works of any scale, because audacious doesn't happen overnight. There's a risk of death with the work that we do. A lot of people should not take that risk. But let people build up to it. Create spaces, make it happen. Promote with your small budget. You don't need to throw a lot of money at it. And let it grow organically, and it'll build. And if you stay dedicated to it, if even a handful of people are in it for the long haul, and they're playing the long game, it'll move. And like everything, it grows in time, like a seed.
So, Vice Mayor, I think to your point, I want to sort of suggest maybe two models. So the first is Grand Rapids, Michigan, which had an archives. And so what they did was they put a significant amount of money into basically letting the entire city be a canvas and bringing in both local and outside artists to sort of turn any space that they could make available, from a garage to a vacant storefront, a gallery that's now people from around the world travel to. So I think one piece is really looking at the assets you have and maybe the assets you may not think you have. And that's one sort of stretch model. And then the other model that may be more of the sort of scale, as Paul would suggest, is if anybody's been to Philadelphia, there's this incredible transformation of the waterfront that's been led by the Delaware River Waterfront Conservancy, and that really started with a group called Groundswell Design. But in short, this was an area of the city that was separated from the city by 12 lanes of the interstate. There was no public transit that went there. What they did was they worked with a group called Groundswell Design to build in the summertime a sort of a pop-up beer garden. Is an underwhelming way of describing the beautiful thing that they've done. And it went from basically 100 visitors a week to millions, and it started bringing revenue. But all that started with sort of this idea, like a lot of what we do is like a circus. And now the circus has gone away, but we come and go, and if you don't like us, we're gone. But the point is, we want to try to create a sense of irresistibility. And just that one element around politics is, we've taken that approach of the Groundswell Design and actually brought them in to reimagine Plaza Cesar Chavez around the Super Bowl. And so we did it, and it was expensive, and over 10 days we modeled it, we measured everything to see what people would use. We did a lot of community engagement before, but it was always built that it could go away. So on the second night it's up, I get a call from a council member about 10 in the evening. And he calls and he says, I'm really disappointed. How could you do this and not have local beer on tap? And so just think about that for a second. The council member's not calling me to say, how could you do my part? People are angry about it. But the notion that you've now created a new model for normal and they want to tweak on what that looks like. Again, all of it's something that could go away, as Chris said wisely, in terms of the rapid prototyping. So I think there's that element of when you bring people in, but you start to work it to make it irresistible based on what you have, based on the notion of temporary, and whether the notion of that sort of regular festival is of interest. There are just a few options that we've looked at that have been successful that might be relevant as you think about your future. So I just wanted to jump into in somewhat of a response to the question about the role of government. I got involved with the Arts Commission because I wasn't crazy about the art in Los Altos. And so for me, that was the first step in trying to make a change. But for 4 years before I got on the Arts Commission, Maddie was trying to get funding from the city for a master plan. It took 4 years, and we finally got a master plan. This is part of that. So it is an ongoing process. I view this as one of the first steps in moving us further down the line. And so I would hope that people will come away from tonight inspired by what they've heard and try to figure out what first steps they themselves can take. Secondly, Paul, I was glad I was going to ask you to talk about Gmail because Paul always gives a very truncated version of how that came about. But he was told explicitly not to put ads in Gmail, for example. And my favorite quote from Paul, when Marissa Meyer told him, after Paul had done this and put ads in Gmail, I thought we agreed not to put ads in Gmail, and Paul said, I don't remember that. I'm not a very agreeable guy. So he just went ahead and did it overnight because he knew he could. And it certainly grew into something much larger than the bad code that Paul originally wrote. So again, it's an example of the power of prototyping. When Larry and Sergey saw what Paul had done, they changed their minds instantly. Oh, this could actually work. And I think if we can take small steps in Los Altos, make changes, and show people what the effect of that is, then we have an opportunity to do much bigger things down the road.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful if you can just give people a taste of what it is. It's really hard to convince them of a vision. Most people aren't terribly visionary. And so a lot of really important things are start off as temporary. We were a little bit involved in the Bay Lights. I don't know if you've been up to San Francisco. It's this beautiful thing on the Bay Bridge. It looks like music, to me at least. And that was started as a temporary thing. And even doing that temporary was like roughly impossible, but they managed to make it happen. And then, part of the reason we support that is I believe like once people saw it, once they got used to it being there, they would just be like, oh, hell no, we're not going to take that down. It's like part of the city skyline. And I mean, I believe like the Eiffel Tower was the same way, right? It was a lot of really iconic things started as temporary, because temporary gives you greater permission, or even you don't have permission, right? Like, isn't the Wall Street Bull, it was just sort of like snuck in there, right? And then people are like, hey, that's cool, right? So just sneak the art in, get permission.
That's forgiveness.
Yeah.
Macy's entire career.
Hi, I'm Bebe Song. Among other things, I curate a science and technology art gallery online. And I'm from China, and I'm also trying to build a platform to create opportunities for both for artists here in China as well as Chinese artists here in the US. For example, I'm working with a developer in southern China to bring large-scale projects over there. I'm also, hearing this, I'm also coming to mind a music group of Shanghai Conservatory of Music which have been creating really fantastic experimental music, bringing together, combining classical Western music with Chinese indigenous or folk music, but also putting together with multimedia. So very experimental, but very leading edge and innovative. I'm trying to find opportunities to perhaps put them together with technology artists to create new installations and new performing experiences, but also looking for places to host. My question is, I'm curious whether public art, like the city of Los Altos, would welcome foreign artists, and if that's the case, what would be the criteria, and what kind of extra hurdle would foreign artists face in doing something like this? I mean, this project that I have in mind, for example, it could be a great thing to both straddle tradition and innovation in the future, the past and the future, but also an opportunity to have cultural exchanges between the East and the West. So would this be something that a city public art initiative be interested in? If so, what will be the criteria and hurdles?
I can't answer for the commission. My hope would be that yes, that there would be the opportunity for cultural exchange, absolutely, and hopefully some collaboration as well. I think that the guidelines by which that all happens and the kinds of projects might be a little further down the line, but there might be some portal where you can submit your idea and have some kind of conversation now. And I would ask perhaps Doug or Maddie or one of the other commissioners to speak in more detail. But I think in terms of the art planning and the master plan, that would certainly be a component that would be considered and hopefully baked into that document.
And if I can sort of hop on that and maybe just bring it up a couple thousand feet, obviously I don't know, I know even less than Cathy for sure about what the process might be, but your question reminds me of the advice, right, that I cobbled together half an hour ago, which is, well, what do you ask the community? You know, how do you elicit that vision that one of the questioners asked? How do you get it? And, you know, it would be it's easy for me, probably easy for many of you to imagine a vision statement, which is, we want to showcase as much culturally diverse art as possible. And equally, or alternatively, you could have a statement which is, we want to showcase the indigenous heritage of this particular geographic place. And those would be very different statements of purpose and very different statements of desire. And surely the art and the energy around accomplishing them and manifesting either of those would be different and would yield different things. But probably the process of getting there would be the same. So if this town, you know, back to the Los Altos question, if this town says, we're in the center of Silicon Valley, we acknowledge that we're somewhat underwhelming as a region, and so, you know, here's how Los Altos is going to try and bridge that gap. We're going to fill it in by being the historic, you know, center, the San Pedro Square, right, with the Adobe hut, or we're going to be the shining light of, you know, future technology, and it's going to be like, you know, Times Square or Bund and Shanghai or whatever.
Or the diversity of the demographic.
Or the diversity of the, absolutely.
Far more so.
Right. Exactly. It's like, you know, we are an immigrant community, and we're made up of immigrants, and our most famous companies and our iconic products that have made us what we are. So I think there's a way that the community can state what the shared goal is, and then the art will fill that up like helium.
You could show it at the generator. You could show it at the generator. We have a giant space for doing exactly what you want.
Fantastic.
It can be a seed, and then everyone else can see it and see if they love it.
Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm a small business owner in downtown Los Altos. One thing that I'm hearing a lot about is sort of the idea of how to grow something from temporary to permanent, but it's about creating some sort of buzz. Being one of the younger people in the room here, I'll tell you, not quite a millennial, but we have a short attention span. Younger people have a short attention span. That's why people love Pokemon Go. That's why millennials love Banksy, because something that's temporary, that is there for a finite amount of time, you go out to see it, you take your friends out, you go. It's like, and then it's going to be there, you can build a beautiful sculpture, you see it, you take your family to see it when they're in town, and it's sort of loses its buzz. So I agree that once we get something going, it's great, but the people in this room are, if we're here, and thanks all of you for being here, but the people in the community are here because we're at least open to the idea of improving the art here. So my question is, for the people that aren't here, or for the people in government, or for the people that we need to convince to get just a little step going. But I thought it was funny at the beginning, actually, no, I should get to it. What's the most valuable, this is for, I guess, Danny and Paul and Kelly, from not an economic standpoint necessarily, but there has to be some return on investment. There has to be some value. It's great if you have a philanthropist who will just give money for art for the sake of not making something big that people come for. But generally, is it connection? Is it the potential to get like a boiling pot for ideas? Is there a tangible return on investment that you guys can use to sort of bait government people or people who might fund it to go for something small just to get the seed going?
Yes. I think maybe the High Line is now the most visited destination in New York. It cost $250 million. It's brought in $2 billion of economic revenue, 12,000 jobs. It's a very different model than in Los Altos, but so yes, everything that we do in San Jose that's focused on public life, which in essence is how we build the city for people, is driven by public health goals, mental health goals, economic development goals, talent attraction retention goals. The notion that you should engage the corporate social responsibility arm of a local tech company is wrong. You should engage their head of human resources or their CEO, because what they're seeing is that their employees, especially their young ones, the millennials, don't want to be here. And I think that there's a limited time span of how long they're going to be willing to spend arguably the best years of their life stuck on the 101, which if and when this region goes away, will be the historic landmark of what we've left behind. So the way that takes us back and forth. So I recognize where you're coming from. I sort of think maybe differently about the notion of permanence and temporary, but everything we do is driven by those models meeting people where they are, and the best thing you can do? Take people from here to the place that's most aspirational for where you could be. We just led a trip to Guadalajara, Copenhagen, Toronto, Portland, Chicago, New York. But with each of them, you go and you focus on something specific. We don't go to Copenhagen and say, let's be like Copenhagen tomorrow. We go and look at the bike and public space infrastructure with actual tangible steps about where San Jose is and how we move them towards a public life agenda. So I think with that, there's sort of a number of pieces there, but it's, you need to measure everything and figure out how you move it forward, and also have those aspirational elements of people to be able to the right models.
Probably have time for one more question. Is there anyone else who's burning?
My question is, you commented about drawing out creativity, and everybody is creative, and I think the process for us doing the public art master plan is to try, this is such a small group of people, but we'd like to reach a larger group, and also how to get our city government and our city staff to get into that creative mindset too. Do you do workshops? How do you do it? How do you get people to realize that they are creative?
This would be a long answer.
Is that working? No wonder my mic wasn't. All right, I'll give a short example, but I do think one answer to your question is engage in a process and get people to kind of participate in roles that might not be their normal day-to-day role, right? So I often talk about sort of modalities of behavior. And one example of that is I think a good creative process has both moments where you're divergent, right? You're expanding the number of possibilities, you're creating options, and it has moments where you're convergent, where you're making decisions and choices and narrowing. And bad creative process, in my experience, tries to do both of those simultaneously and does neither of them well, like in a group setting, because you're talking about collaborative work. So one of the lowest hanging sort of fruits in collaborative process is just getting in sync about what stage in the process you are and what kind of behaviors are constructive at that moment in time. And I can go very long into this, but what I see happen most consistently in those kinds of things, everyone gets together and everything kind of just becomes a sort of a meeting. You'll have some people trying to be, in my particular example, divergent and coming up with lots of ideas, throwing out, and other people trying to exert their judgment and be, in decision-making mode, and instead you have a pretty bad meeting of doing both of those things. And so getting in sync or agreeing about, okay, which sort of sequence are we going to go through these different kinds of steps to get to a result? I think both are important. You're going to need people who might have deep technical expertise or financial insight or whatever to be very judgmental and help you make good decisions and choices. But you probably don't want them to do that in the first meeting, right? For example, anyway, I'm trying to give you a quick answer to a long sort of thing, but basically it's about being process mindful and getting in sync across the group about which sort of behaviors are now. Because ideally you'll have some of the same people show up at different moments in a journey together and remarkably show up very differently and participate very differently to help move the ball forward. Right? Does that make sense? You want to add anything?
We do a crazy idea where we'll ask everyone to think of their craziest idea and not ask for feedback. So just sit down and then we'll have everyone declare it. And it sounds like a silly, let's all work and throw out crazy ideas. But when we're thinking about our projects, all these crazy, stupid ideas come out. Most of them are terrible. They're remarkably bad. And we ask no one to judge it. And you put everything on the table, and you step away from it for an hour or two, and then you come back and say, can we do any of these things?
The important part to understand about that is it's not just that, because I think that's one modality where you want to generate lots of ideas and sort of defer judgment. In fact, IDEO made very kind of well-known these sort of brainstorming rules they use, and that's because the brainstorm is a mode where you're generating lots of ideas. But to be clear, any company would get nothing done if that's the only way they operate, right? You never get anything done. It's just as important to have moments later where we're like, okay, now we're not going to generate any more ideas, right? We're not looking for more options. We're looking to take this sort of portfolio we've created and really get crisp and clear about what kind of criteria we're going to go through, how we're and start to narrow. Otherwise, you have a similar but very different feeling where you just kind of circle back and keep, running around in kind of the open-ended space.